Okay, we're all framed up. This is the new space. Um, this is where the fun is gonna happen. Oh boy. Woo! There's still a bunch of things to do before moving in, but we've made some big progress so far. So let me show you how we got to this point. After we poured the slab, we had to let it sit for a bit to cure. I don't know the exact science behind it or how long it takes to completely cure, but I imagine more than just a few days. They say that there are parts of the Hoover Dam that haven't completely cured yet, and that thing was built over 80 years ago. But this slab is a bit smaller than the Hoover Dam. Okay, first step was to work on the base plates. The boards that are in direct contact with the concrete are the first to get laid out. These boards are treated to prevent rot and termite damage. Since there are a bunch of obstacles such as anchor bolts and pipes sticking up through the slab, these boards have to be carefully notched and cut to sit flat on the ground. Okay, first day of framing. I'll just say, these guys work fast. In one day, they got all the exterior walls up. Here's how they did it. They nailed the top plate just on the outside of the base plate, all the way around the building. Then, they could mark the locations of each vertical stud, following the plans to make sure any thicker beams were placed in the correct locations. Once all the stud locations were marked, they lined up everything on the ground and started nailing away. First, the studs were nailed to the top plate, followed by the bottom plate. A block was nailed in between each stud to keep correct spacing. On this wall that they're working on, there's a 5-foot wide by 4-foot tall window. So while the wall was on the ground, they also framed in the window with a pretty hefty header and some cripples. The header helps disperse the weight of everything above it, mainly the roof, around the window and keeps it from being a weak point in the framing. When everything for the wall was complete, they tilted it up and put it in place, lining it back up so the anchor bolts stick through the base plate. For the meantime, it's just held up with some long 2x4s. Until a side wall is up, they can't really freestand. The next wall to go up was the other end, which is the far end of the workshop, with the big sliding barn door entry. Another section of wall was completed and raised, completing that corner of the guest house. Those two sections of wall were secured together temporarily. They'll be squared up later when more walls are up. After that, sections of wall were constructed and raised into place. And before the day's end, they had all the exterior walls built and in place. Man, what a sight to see. This thing is coming right along. Okay, so now there are all these individual sections of wall standing up. And to connect them all, you put a second top plate that overlaps the seam to really make all the walls secure. Before they left for the day, they squared up all the walls and secured them with diagonal braces. If they didn't put these on, the building could turn into the Leaning Tower of Pisa overnight. I spent the rest of the day getting a feel for the space. This is the first time I got a sense of how big it'll actually be. Up until this point, it was only drawings on a piece of paper or having to use my imagination out back with bricks showing the corners of the workshop. I took some measurements to start gauging how I'm going to lay out the space. And of course, I couldn't resist climbing up and seeing everything from atop the wall. I tend to use gravity and potential energy in the things I build, so I'm just scoping out the potential energy. Okay, the next day they kept going and started by putting up all the interior walls. There's just a dividing wall between the shop and the guest house, and a few small walls inside the guest house to section off the bathroom, closet, etc. I noticed that the wall with the door for the bathroom was installed the wrong way, so they had to pop it out, flip it around, and put it back in. Large sections of the walls are structural shear walls, which means they're super rigid and are sheeted on the outside. They're also tied to the foundation differently, with heavier duty anchor bolts and these special ties, which are all connected to thicker studs. All these just make the building super strong, so it can handle all the abuse I'm going to do to it, as well as make it tough against a big earthquake. I live in Southern California, so don't jinx it. Inside the workshop, there are long walls without an L section to keep it from bowing out, so they temporarily put some large X's across the open space to hold the tops of the walls at precise vertical. These braces will stay in place until the roof structure nears completion, so the walls don't move while everything above it is constructed. The roof lumber was delivered just when all the work on the walls was finishing up. There's some beefy lumber in this load. They first put the big beam up that's 20 feet long and spans the width of the workshop. This beam signals the end of the vaulted section. It'll be vaulted from that beam all the way to the large barn door opening. They continued by putting in all the main structural pieces of the roof, which consists of some big beams, ridge lines, and all the things needed to hold them up. Across the vaulted section of the workshop is a large engineered beam. I can't tell you what it's made of because I have no idea, but I can tell you where it's from. Hey, that's pretty cool. Go Canada. Again, just couldn't resist climbing up to get a solid bird's eye view of the workshop.
13'8".
With those main pieces in place, they just kept chugging along, placing all the rafters and joists. Rafters are the diagonal pieces of the roof that go from the edge to the center, and joists are the flat boards that run along the ceiling. So in the vaulted section, there are only rafters and no joists. Doing the roof took a few days. Unlike the walls, where they easily build large sections on the ground and lift them into place, all the roof pieces are individually cut and placed, so it's much more time consuming. After all the rafters were placed, they could all be trimmed along the bottom edge to get ready for the fascia board. A chalk line was used to mark all the board's ends at once. Then, all the ends were cut vertical. That way, the fascia board can be put on straight up and down, which makes it possible, or just much easier, to put on gutters. Okay, all the edges were prepped, and the guys put on the fascia board. It goes all the way around the building, following the entire roof line. This just gives the roof a really clean edge all the way around. Before they left for the day, they threw up the roof sheeting on the far side, and I continued my exploration of the workshop from above, playing around and shimmying along the beams within reach. Oh, I should mention that these are 10-foot high walls. The next day, they threw up the sheeting on the other side. And that was pretty much it. Aside from a few minor things from the inspector, the framing was complete. I am just over the moon with how everything is turning out. This building has been in the works for a long time, and it's up, and it's here. And we're moving right along, getting closer to moving in and getting to actually work in here. Oh, I'm so excited. Signing out for the first time inside of my new workshop. That's it for now. See ya.